Welcome, I guess is what I meant to say. Uh, it's good to have everybody here. Good to have some visitors with us this morning. We are continuing with our look at we're now at the night Jesus is betrayed, moving into the all of that whole ordeal that leads up to the crucifixion. Before we start into the material this morning, I want to remind you, there are still two yards, two folks who need their leaves raked. If anybody would like to get a hold of those two jobs, the sign-up sheet that Alex sent out in an email was almost all filled, and then we had one come in late. So like I said, there's two left. So if you would like to take on that leaf raking, you're probably off the hook for the next few days till it dries up a little bit. But if you want to try and jump on that next Saturday or whatever, let me know or let Alex know, and we'll get those taken care of. So that's it for the announcement portion. Let's begin class with a prayer. Zach's going to lead us in a prayer. Do we have any specific prayer requests this morning?
A couple of sick kids at home, and Jeremy, my son, has got asthma, and it's really kind of hitting his breathing, and that's
Yeah.
appreciate the prayer.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird air quality situation we're in right now, too.
Just waiting to Jeremy at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Fox family. If you didn't see the email yesterday, I guess Friday at some point, Brian Fox passed away unexpectedly. The Nolan and Gloria's son, of course, Tina and Bruce's brother. So that was a shock for them. Anything else? Okay, Zach, if you would.
All right, yeah, let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together, to dig into the Word, and to learn about your Son and the sacrifice he made, and try to gain some insights into what's going through his head at the time. That you help us to take those insights, apply them to our lives. And we do want to lift up everyone that's sick right now. A lot of people kind of cold and flu season has started. I pray that you be with them, help them to get better, and be with Jeremy and Davison that he's dealing with. Additionally, we want to lift up the Fox family with the loss of Brian. I pray that you be with them right now during this time. It's an extremely difficult time. Just comfort them and be with us. Help us to be there for them as they need. In your son's name, we pray.
Amen. Okay. As we were looking last week, as the Jesus and the apostles were approaching, sorry, I'm trying to find a verse here, approaching the Garden of Gethsemane, we kind of talked about, we'd finished up with the Passover meal, and now they're making their approach toward the garden, and the tension that would have been in the air and in their interactions. And we were talking about in that upper room, the apostles. The text says there, we'll be in Matthew 26 primarily if you want to head that direction. But the text even says that Peter's the one that is recorded. It's actually him that says, "I'll never turn away from you. In fact, I'm willing to die for you." But the text says all the apostles said the same thing. They were all on board. They were all saying, "Yeah, we'll go with you to the very end." And along the way, Jesus again tells them, said, "No, listen. In fact, you guys are all going to fall away." And we ended last week kind of talking about that idea of are we willing? What are we willing to give up? What is it that, as I think for all of us, we would all, I'm sure, say there's no way I'd ever deny Jesus. We talked about the horrific things that happen at Columbine and other situations where we have record that people were asked, "Do you believe in God?" And when they answered yes, they paid for it with their lives. And I think we'd all like to say, if I'm in that situation, I know what I do, and God willing, none of us will ever be there. But with the apostles, they don't realize it quite yet, but that's really where they are. They're in that situation. They're at the point where they're saying, "Yeah, I'll if I have to die, I'll stick with you." And we know the end of the story. But what I want us to look at this morning is just as they move into the garden and look at that moment with the apostles. In I don't know, we have the ability of hindsight. Looking at that in hindsight, if Jesus tells them you're going to all fall away, if Jesus says this night you're all going to have to make a really hard choice and you're all going to blow it, what should their response have been? Because what we see is that they all say, no, I won't. And then we also know that at some point in that upper room, they're arguing about what? Yeah, who's going to be, who's really the best among us? And Jesus goes, you know what? All you guys fighting among yourselves, who's going to be the best? You're all going to walk away tonight. What should their response have been to that? I mean, in an ideal situation. What's that? Yes. Say, can you please give me some? I don't want to do that. What were you going to say?
How could you help me not do that?
Yeah.
Same thing.
But instead, what we see is these guys saying, "Oh no, I wouldn't do that. Maybe these guys would, but not me. I would never do that." What Jesus is trying to get them to do, and maybe not specifically in this moment, but this is what he's always done. He's saying, look to him for strength. Look to him. I mean, you think about what's the first beatitude? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Jesus tells him, Matthew 18:4. He says, unless you become like one of these, and who's the one of these? A child who is innocent, completely dependent. This has been kind of Jesus' thing with these guys and with all of his disciples, all of his followers, saying, stop trying to do things on your own. Stop trying to lean on your own strength. Look to me for strength. He's prepared them with the ideas of being humble. He's prepared them with the ideas of being self-sacrificing. But instead, what they're doing is trying to stand on their own strength. They're the ones who are saying, I won't do this. In fact, like I said, Peter even says, Peter verbalizes what apparently they're all thinking. Because he says, I'd even be willing to die for you. Because it says, all of them said the same thing. Jesus had talked a lot with these guys about dying to self, taking up your cross. What do you think they thought he meant this whole time? I mean, obviously, they were, and we've talked about this. Somebody mentioned this a week or two ago. Jesus has been deliberately vague with them a lot. Jesus has said a lot of things that they're going, I don't know what you're even talking about. So that apparently is another one of those things that dying to self, taking up your, they're apparently missed that completely. Dana.
I think that their mindset is, I'm willing to fight for you, Lord. And see it even when Peter draws his sword.
Yeah.
And I think they're ready for that kind of a sacrifice, but this giving up and just handing ourselves over to the enemy, we didn't sign up for that.
Yeah, the surrender aspect of it, maybe. And really, that's even in a broader sense what Jesus is saying. There's a surrender. He's asking them to do surrender to him, to say, hey, let me carry you through this. And what they're saying is, no, we're supposed to fight this thing. This isn't supposed to. And we know, like I said, we talked about this last week. We know these guys turn the corner. But what Jesus is trying to get them to learn, the same thing that we all have to learn, is that faith, like Jesus wants, requires our total dependence on him. And that's hard to learn. I mean, that's a hard lesson for any of us to learn, to give up what we think we have, give up our own qualities, our own strengths, our own whatever, our own goodness, and say, I'm not going to get there without Jesus' help. That's exactly why, I think, that's exactly why Paul writes so much of what he writes in Ephesians 6. What is Ephesians 6? Take up the whole armor of God. Take up the whole armor of who? He doesn't say put on your armor. You have a lot of really good characteristics. You have a lot of really good, you're smart, you're clever. Use those things and do your best and try and stay faithful. No, he says take up the whole armor of God. Put on His stuff. Put on the things that He has provided that will carry us through. We're never told, we're told to be strong and courageous. Right? That's the one thing that repeats throughout the Old Testament, even into the New Testament. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. But we're never told because you're good enough to get through this on your own. Not ever. That's never who we are. That is, again, that's one of those great Bible themes. Isaiah 31, verse 1. This is one of a plethora of verses you could pull from the Old Testament that says basically the same idea. Isaiah 31:1 says, Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and who depend on horses. They trust in the abundance of chariots and in the large number of horsemen. They do not look to the Holy One of Israel, and they do not seek the Lord. Well, isn't that the problem really with the Old Testament? With Israel in the Old Testament? There were always those little slivers of we're looking to God, we're leaning on God, relying on God. But then there's those great huge gaps where they're like, look what we've accomplished. Look who we are. Look what we've done. So this is in this moment with Jesus back in Matthew 26. Look at verse 33. Because let's back up to 31. Because this is that moment. It says, verse 30 says, they sung a hymn, then they headed off to the Mount of Olives. Verse 31, then Jesus said to them, tonight all of you will fall away because of me, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, and remember this, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee. Now, well, let me not get ahead of myself. Let's stay here. Peter told him, and okay, can't you just imagine this scene? I'll ask you, imagine this scene. Because they're walking along, and it says Jesus told all of them. And then Peter, this seems to be, Jesus, let's get away from these guys. And Peter says, listen, here's the deal. Even if everyone else falls away because of you, I will never fall away. Truly I tell you, Jesus said to him, tonight before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Even if I have to die with you, Peter told him, I'll never deny you. And all the disciples said the same thing. So that is that hinge moment where, like I said, we've just talked about this, that Jesus says this is not just Peter. Peter's the one who is, whatever, bold, arrogant, whatever the word might be, enough to just say it. And at this point, it almost seems like the group of them might have their egos bruised a little bit because Jesus has told them that, there's some problems with you guys. Then this happens. And what Jesus is trying to get them to see, so what they should have done is lean on His sufficiency. They aren't going to get it done. The lesson they'll take from this, apparently, because we know where they end up, is to lean on His faithfulness. In some of this material that I'm using, one of the writers that I've found asks a lot of questions. This is a horrible moment for Jesus. This moment in the garden. If there's ever been a moment that Jesus is shown in a moment of weakness, this might be it. If you're an observer going, let's find a spot where we can take some shots at Jesus' character, this might be the point where you'd say, well, look here. He's trying to get out of this whole crucifixion thing. He's trying to bail out of this. But what this is, or what this seems to be, is an incredibly stark contrast in faithfulness. Because you've got these guys who are saying, I'll die with you. Jesus says, no, you won't. In fact, you're all going to run off. And what He says, in essence, then, is here's how you should behave. And he's going to go in the garden, and he's going to enter into this moment of complete surrender to God. Complete surrender to what God's plan is. So when we think about this idea of that last thing on the last slide, faith requires our total dependence on God. How does Jesus do that in this scene in the garden? Not my will, but your will be done. How else?
It's kind of the same thing, but he even asks, it's basically the same point, but again, he asks God, like, hey, if we can, maybe find a different way to do this.
Yeah.
Or just, if this can be accomplished, let this cup of suffering be taken. He's literally asking if there's any other way that we can accomplish what your will is. Also, me not having to suffer, can we do that?
Yeah, so he's even saying, if, in the 33 years I've been down here, if there's been another plan you come up with, let me know that now. Yes, sir.
He told them that this is going to happen. So it's like you're wrong, we know better than you. And do that same thing.
Yep.
And for us to be dependent really requires us to have this level of humility. We can submit. I think that's what Jesus is here.
Yeah.
He's submitting and pulling himself to an incredible level, showing them that this is
Absolutely. The two words you used, he's submitting himself and he's humbling himself. Is Jesus facing a faith challenge here? Yeah, I would think so. I think that's why we get to see this scene, because I think this is so we can understand when we're in our moment of faith challenge, when our faith is being tested, when we're being pushed as far as we think we can go, we can't ever say, "Oh, Jesus, you just don't get this. You don't know how hard this is for me." And Jesus goes, "Oh, really?" Open your Bible to Matthew 26. That's what Jesus would say. Because we get to see this point of, literal anguish, sorrow, grief over. And here's we'll get to this in a minute too. Here's what's incredible. His grief, his sorrow is grief over sin. We've all been there probably. You've all been in a situation where you've done something to somebody, you've said something, you've done something in your life where it hits you and you go, "Oh man, what have I done? How am I going to fix this?" That's where Jesus is. But whose sin is it? It's not his. It's everybody else's. And he's carrying that. We'll get to that in a minute. But again, and the other thing that we're going to reiterate over and over here, I guess that's what reiterate means, is he knows this is all coming. This is something that is, if you haven't noticed yet, this is a theme for this quarter. Because we cannot ever forget that none of this took Jesus by surprise. None of this came out of the blue. In fact, you remember what Jesus said. When I've resurrected, I'll go ahead of you to Galilee. Maybe they missed that in the moment, but Jesus is saying it's going to be a horrible day, a horrible night, and I'm going to die. But when that's all over, I'll meet you in Galilee. Which, just that sentence is stunning. But apparently, in this whole idea, Jesus is even thinking, in this whole moment, Jesus is thinking ahead. What does he tell Peter in Luke 22? Luke 22:32, he's having this conversation with Peter. He tells Peter he's going to pray about him. About what? His strength. That he'll recover. So, he's even going, Peter's going, "No, I'll even die for you." And Jesus goes, yeah, okay, whatever. In fact, I'm asking the Father that you'll get through this. That what you're about to do, you're going to hate yourself for it. But I just pray that you get through it. I just pray that you come out on the other side better. Jesus is reassuring, in that sentence where he says, "I'll go ahead of you to Galilee," he is reassuring them that this is all going to be okay. And it seems like they miss that in the moment, which, understandable. But he also seems to be saying, I know you guys are going to rebound. Why is that important? Have you ever let somebody down? How's that make you feel? Everybody's like, I don't know, bad. Yeah, you feel unworthy. You feel like, how am I ever going to face this person again? Especially to this degree.
I was just say, it gives them something to hold on to. Like, again, sometimes they don't seem to recognize the meaning of some of these things Jesus says in the moment. But at least what it does accomplish is it gives them, again, something to hold on to, something to at least have as a spur of encouragement that they can reflect.
Right. Yeah, and maybe they don't see it in this moment. But apparently, I mean, Matthew remembered it. I mean, he wrote it down. But we also have to remember, Jesus is trying to let these guys know that they still are going to have work to do. They're going to fail. They're going to feel terrible about it, but they've got to come out of this. In fact, here's something that I think is interesting that I don't think I've ever noticed till I was working on this stuff. After Jesus' resurrection, turn to Matthew 28, a couple of pages over. Matthew 28. Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, go to visit the tomb. There's an earthquake and all this other stuff. Verse 3, his appearance, there's an angel there. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were as white as snow. The guards were so shaken by fear of him that they became like dead men. The angel told the women, here's some reassurance for you guys. Don't be afraid, because I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he is risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Okay, he says, it's okay. It's okay. I know that's who you're looking for. This is where he was dead. Look where he's gone. Next thing he says, then go quickly and tell his disciples he is risen from the dead. Verse 10, Jesus appears to the women. Then Jesus told them, do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there. The first thing that they hear when they figure out Jesus is resurrected is, let's get back together. It's time to move forward. That gives me goosebumps for some reason. Because that's Jesus saying, listen, I mean, fast forward to before the crucifixion. Jesus saying, you're going to blow this tonight, but it's okay. Let's meet in Galilee, and we got to move forward. Tommy and then Dana.
Mark adds another little caveat to this.
Mm-hmm.
He says, he's risen, he's not here, see the place where they go. But go tell his disciples and Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he even says, and
Make sure Peter's invited.
yeah, get in Peter's face, because he's going to need that.
I think it's significant in Luke where he writes down in verse 32, but I pray for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, but immediately addresses him, not the fact that you're going to betray me. That's not the failure.
Yeah.
The failure would have been not coming back.
Exactly. The failure would be to not rebound. That would be the failure. And that is such a significant lesson, that our failure is not our sin. Yeah, I mean, it is. Yes, it is. But our real failure is when we stay there. It's when we go, you know what, I just can't do this. This whole Christianity, it's too big for me. You know, I do this all the time. I do this. I just can't do this. Forget it. That's our failure. Yes, sir.
That same verse in Luke, he doesn't say if you turn again.
Yeah.
When.
Yeah.
If that's going to happen, then you get a job for you to do when that happens. So same thing for us.
Well, it's almost like Jesus is just going, okay. Yeah, when you're over this sobbing crybaby fit, I mean, not that. But when he says, when you're over this moment, we got stuff to do. Jake.
Yeah, just a couple things. I really think that the passage you're talking about in Isaiah, it was pointed right at Jesus.
Yeah.
The last king that Isaiah prophesied to was Hezekiah. Hezekiah is the one that made the pact or the alliance.
Yeah.
And so he was saying, woe to you guys.
Yeah.
In the same way, Jesus is very pointed. He heard them arguing about who's going to be the greatest in his kingdom. He heard them
Peter, you alone, it's a lot more pointed,
Yeah.
specifically, personally, than it sometimes seems just to read it.
Yeah.
And I think I think too often we read scripture like a proverb, and we assume the context is bound up in each verse.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not. And then the other thing, I think these guys, I think we all think these guys, at this point, they thought Jesus was performing a physical kingdom, a military revolution against Rome.
Yeah.
And so I believe that when he told them, when I'm resurrected, I'm going to go with you to Galilee, they're thinking decades in the future.
Yeah.
When you're ready to become immortal and live on your throne forever, that's when you're going to meet us in Galilee. You got it, man.
Yeah.
And they really thought that the plan broke
Yeah.
when he died, and they're having to be reminded by the angels and by the steps here that this was the plan all along, guys. And even I also think that even Judas thought that he was helping Jesus out.
Yeah, it was kind of pushing the thing along.
The danger of us sometimes having our own mind for we know what God's plan is, so we're going to help him along. I think that's exactly what happened to Judas.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to incite Rome against Jesus to make Jesus quit waiting. What are you waiting for, man?
Well, and we even see that mindset as Jesus is about to ascend back to heaven. Is now the time you're going to restore the kingdom. And when you say that about Isaiah, I wonder sometimes, Jesus as the author of the Bible, I wonder sometimes as Jesus is in these moments, if those Old Testament verses are rolling through his head going, man, I could just quote you guys so many verses about you right now. But again, all of this is, the point with all of this is these guys need to be reminded that whatever happens to you guys in the next 12 hours, you're going to have to get over it. You're going to have to move forward. Dana.
I hate to always go back to sports cliches, but this reminds me of Hoosiers, Derek's point when he says, when you return, when you come back,
Yeah.
strengthen your brothers. It's just like Gene Hackman. And he gets, it's the last shot of the deal. He tells his guys, okay, set the picket fence, and when so-and-so hits that shot, you make sure you get back on feet.
Yeah. It's that projecting it out. Here's what's going to... But again, with Jesus, it's different. It's a little different than Gene Hackman. But it is, here's what's going to happen. You're going to blow this tonight. But when you get over it, here's what we have to do. And we know how this worked out even. Let's just take a minute and think about Peter's subplot there. John 21, we know the situation fairly well. The apostles have gone back to fishing, it seems. It seems like they're maybe kind of not sure what to do. They're fishing. One thing I think is significant that again, one of those things I think maybe I've kind of blown over before as I've read through this. Jesus tells them to put their nets on the other side. They catch a great, huge catch of fish. Peter jumps out of the boat. Again, Peter again is getting out of a boat to go to Jesus. But he swims to the shore. But even once he gets there, he seems to be in a moment of uncertainty.
It's an even greater testament to the apostles' faith, that they do sort of have their moment of crisis and
Yeah.
come back. Because of course it would have been ideal for them, to never have that moment, to always be, right there and not have that period of crisis. Yeah, of course, the idealness, to show that they're ready to go. But the fact that they do all fall away and then come back.
They weather it, yeah.
It's even more. To me, it's even more admirable.
Well, you think about James, not an apostle, but James, Jesus' brother, maybe observing some of this, maybe not at this point, but at least probably hearing about all of this after the fact. What does he write about faith and our faith being tested? It produces endurance, which produces a better faith. He sees that. And this is what the apostles do, and we see that. In this moment with Peter, this kind of changed my thinking on this a little bit. Jesus has told them before he's crucified, I know you guys are going to fall away. Peter says, no, wait, I'll even die. Jesus says, no, you won't. be willing to die for me. In fact, you're going to deny me. He tells him there's going to be an animal involved even. He tells them all the details. He knows everything Peter's going to do. In this moment, Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? What does Peter say? What does he say? You know I do. You know everything. Why are you asking me this? You've proved it. You know everything. Jesus says, do you love me? You know I do. You know I was going to deny you. You knew I was going to run off. You knew I'd be waiting right here in Galilee to get kicked in the teeth again. You know it all. I mean, that to me, that kind of changes his answer, because I've always thought he's just kind of going, you know I love you. But it almost seems like he's saying, you know this. You've proven you know everything we're going to do. And less than 40 days later is Peter's finest hour, where he stands up in a hostile crowd and lays the wood to those people. The Jesus of Nazareth, that you saw him do things. You witnessed his miracles. This same Jesus whom you crucified, God has made both Lord and Savior. I mean, so as Blake was just saying, he takes this horrible moment and he grows. Is Peter then the perfect apostle from that point on? No. I mean, Paul has to get in his face later. But he didn't stay where he was.
Yeah, so you've got like the contrast of us all following Christ, and like you mentioned earlier on, Matthew, he didn't say this one, but like take up his cross. You said like,
Mm-hmm.
anyone wants to be great, but these little children.
Yeah.
Reliance on God, being on the armor of God. But you also get the Jesus in the wilderness in Matthew, and then he goes and he starts his mission. And then you see the disciples, and they go through their wilderness experience. And I actually thought of like Peter going through the crowd saying, hey, you can come see the master, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yeah.
like directing everybody, and then the minute the crowds come to take Jesus, he's nowhere to be seen.
Yeah.
He's denying him. It's like this mountaintop and this valley experience that we go through in life, where it's like, it's great when it's great at church camp or wherever we are.
Yep.
Lectureship, and then like Jesus says, be watchful, pray, so the tempter doesn't come. James, going back to that idea of like, as you are going through your trials, God is refining you so that you can bless other people, and that might be just like Jesus' death.
Yeah.
To bless people.
Yeah, it's
Not your will be done, but thine.
it's this acknowledgement in this moment, in this scene, is the acknowledgement that we all do this with our faith. I mean, I don't think that's what God wants for us. Don't hear me saying that, let's just face it, we're going to do that. I don't think we're supposed to do that. I mean, I think our objective, I think that's the whole abundant life thing. Jesus says, come live the way I want you to live, and you'll stay up here most of the time. But we also have these realities that we do this. I mean, these guys who have walked with Jesus, they're in that moment of doing that. But again, Peter is such a great example of a rebound. I mean, Acts 2, he stands and delivers that sermon. Acts chapter 5, 529, Peter and John, both of the guys in this moment. John, who seems to linger a little bit more, we'll get to that later. But what do they stand in front of the Sanhedrin and tell them? Who are we supposed to obey? You or God? Sorry, we're going to pick God. I mean, just incredibly bold. I mean, when literally their lives are on the line. They've been beaten. They've been flogged. And they're the ones going, you know what? Do what you want. We now know. We've made it through that moment. We know who we are. Yeah.
Something's kind of been going through my head since we started talking about this like last week. None of that, like what you just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
can happen unless they deny Jesus the first time.
Yeah.
Because they don't know how to react in that moment, and then they do it, and then they're like, wait a minute, Jesus did something different. Now I know how to go do that. Now I can do that too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I've always kind of thought through.
Yeah, it's that, I don't know where I've seen this before. It seems like a refrigerator magnet or something. But that one of our greatest gifts is our mistakes. That God allows us to make mistakes so our brains can go, oop, that's not the proper reaction to this because that turned this way. So I've got to fix that. With the apostles in this moment, relying too much on themselves, trying to say, well, I can do, I'm not going to, I'll hang in there. What they obviously figure out is that isn't where they need to be. That this is where they need to be in the point where Jesus is their strength, where Jesus is the one who sees them through. And again, like I said, we would all like to believe, I would like to believe for all of us, that we would never flat out deny. But we make those decisions in life, in those moments in life where we kind of deny, where we kind of turn away from Jesus a little bit. That's a reality sometimes. But what he offers for them is a reminder that you get to come back from that. You get to recover from that. These guys, these apostles will be challenged again and again and again. And we'll take some blows and have to recover. In fact, as we shift into the next scene, they're going to be challenged again as Jesus goes off to pray. But what we can take from just even in this moment, and it's really, obviously it's the overriding theme with everything we do with Jesus, is when we're in our faith challenge moments, we've got to lean on God. We've got to lean on Jesus to pull us through. Sometimes we won't, and sometimes we'll slip up. But we've got to rebound. We've got to be willing to go, okay, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have responded to this. I shouldn't have done whatever it was. I've got to move forward. I've got to make amends. I've got to say, okay, let's go ahead. And we've got to rebound just like these guys have rebounded. When Jesus is our strength, we can stand, and maybe stand it in the right word, we can rebound from even our worst moments. Because, I imagine Peter wishes he could go back and redact some of the New Testament with some of his moments. But we also know from the other amazing moments in his life that he found that strength that was in Jesus, that Jesus gave him to rebound so well. Okay, so now we're going to shift into the garden. Any other thoughts?
That's why when you're reading James, I was saying James also, and Peter, when you realize that when you start reading it, that you know that they walked with God, or walked with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they're writing about, like when he says, give all diligence to do these things, like, don't forget your sins were washed away. Like, don't, all those things, it makes it more, it's so real that he knows what it was
Yeah.
like. And I know what the feelings were, so do this. Do
Right.
this now. It just gives more credence to that. No, they walked with them. So they're saying doing this to do it. And also that either pride has, you're disabled with your pride or with where you're feeling sorry for yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to, like you said, you don't want to be Judas. He just gave up. Judas could have been forgiven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, wherever you are in your, if Judas would have gone back after he threw the coins in the temple and come back to Jesus, Jesus would have forgiven him because that's who Jesus is. But we've got to rebound. We've got to figure out where we go from here. Look over John chapter 18 real quick. And again, I mentioned this a while ago. This is something that will be reiterated too often probably. This is at the end of the scene that we're about to unfold. But this is important for us to be reminded. This is something we have to... And let me tell you, I want us to remember this because there's a religious thinking that doesn't think this way, that does think that this all snuck up on Jesus. John 18:4, after this is all over, what we're going to talk about apparently next week, says, then Jesus, after this prayer scene in the garden, then Jesus, knowing everything that was about to happen to him, went out and said to them, who is it you're seeking? We have to remember that. Again, like I said, we just talked about it. There's no surprises here. Jesus knows all of this. This is a completely willing giving over him. This is a completely willing surrender. And we have to remember that in this moment. Even the pain and the suffering that's coming, he knows it's coming. This moment in the garden, in this prayer, like I said, is a very revealing moment about Jesus. This is where we're very much reminded of Jesus' humanity. as Jesus is walking from the upper room to the garden, you have to think. Yeah, I mean, I get it. He's God. He knows all that's coming, which may be even worse. How would, just to you, how would you feel? How's your stomach at this moment? Your stomach's flopping. You're probably sweating like a pig. I mean, your mouth's dry. I mean, you know what's... Jesus, in this moment, let's never dismiss the fact that this is a human. This is a man who's walking into this garden and says, guys, I need to go here and pray a little bit. I mean, just talking about it, my palms get sweaty. But you can just imagine the human side of Jesus going through all those physiological things that happen. Because he knows. And we know, and that is not just supposition, because we know when he starts praying, we know physically what his body does. By the time they get to the garden, it's going to be late. It's probably, I mean, if Passover started at 6, they go through the whole meal, they have all this discussion, Jesus prays, all this. It's after probably 11 o'clock, pushing midnight. So he's tired. It's been a crazy week. The apostles are tired. It's been a long day. There's mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion. And we have to remember that Jesus was human. So he's going to be nervous. He's going to be tired. He's going to be restless. He's just like us in every way except one. And again, that's the fact that he's sinless. And he is dealing with all of this grief and all of this sorrow we're about to see, not because of his own sin, but because he is willingly saying, I'll take it. I'll do what has to be done to take care of that sin. And it seems like all of that hits him all at once. So we'll look next week. I want you to think about, by next week, log this in your brain and try and think of it. If anything else, think of it on the way here next week. Why does he bring the 3 guys in particular? Question number 1. Question number 2, think about this. Why the grief and the sorrow in this moment? Jesus is the one who has said, don't be afraid of the one who can kill the body, but be afraid of the one who can kill the soul. He knows that's not going to happen to him. So why the stress? Why the anxiety and the grief right here in this moment? That's question 2. And question 3, why does he pray this apparently so that all these guys can hear it? Because what I'll just tell you part of what I think the answer is. I think we're given literally a window into Jesus' heart right here. We're seeing a very human side of deity, which is bizarre. I mean, it's just a bizarre combination of who Jesus is right here. Any other thoughts? Okay, we'll pick up right there next week.